Okay, today we're going to watch a treatment using tuning forks and hot stones together on points on the back. I kind of discovered just playing around how well tuning forks work with hot stones a couple years ago, and we'll show you some nice things that you can do on the back. Before we get started, the music we're listening to in the background is a friend of mine, Marjorie DeMunk, who came up with the, originally she co-founded Acutonics, and then later kind of her own branch, Ohm Therapeutics. And the music you may be able to hear in the background is from Marjorie, and she was an amazing musician. And what I found over the years teaching students how to use the tuning forks is that if you play the Ohm music, Marjorie's Ohm music in the background for your clients while you do the sessions, it really grounds the treatments and makes it, for a lot of people, easier to have really profound sessions even if you're a beginner. So here's the website. It's soundhealingtools.com, or you can just Google Ohm Therapeutics, especially should they move the site around. And I like all of the CDs. You can listen to little samples of them, or even to listen to samples of them on Pandora or your iTunes or whatever. But I find any of the sound healing CDs work, and what we're listening to right here is this one on the bottom left, In the Key of Earth. This isn't just, kind of relaxing massage music, but it helps facilitate some really profound healing journeys because all of the music is played with the same key and overtones as the C sharp of the tuning forks, and actually the tuning forks, kind of use a C sharp prior to sort of piano tuning, and Marjorie played a lot of the ancient instruments that were kind of tuned prior, to the current piano tuning. But there's vibrational healing music, No Place Like Ohm. All of these are great. Alright, so let's take a look at this little video using the hot stones and the tuning forks at the same time. They're replacing a sacrum stone. It's always nice to use a large stone for a sacrum stone. And basically you can place the placement stones wherever you like. Here we're starting with the sacrum, the hands, and the feet. Now remember, of course, when you use placement stones and you're leaving them sit still on the skin, because they're sitting there still, they're going to kind of build up heat and feel hotter than the stones that you keep moving. So even the smaller stones, or the stones that maybe don't seem quite as hot, you still want to use some layers of coverage. Now, here as I'm wrapping stones on the feet, there's many different ways you can do this, different ways you can wrap the towels or the face cradles, and people even sell different kind of straps with Velcro on them. So you can kind of develop your own sandwich method or tying method, whatever works for you. And here, of course, always drying off the stones. Even if you're going to put them on a towel or on some linens for placement stones, you still want to dry them off and then cover them up again as quickly as possible to retain the heat. If you place them on wet, it's not generally going to irritate the client when you first put them on. It's sort of later on when they get the linens kind of soggy wet, and then they cool down, that once they cool down, that the wetness can be irritating. Here we're placing stones bilaterally, sort of in the lamina groove. Depending on what size stones you use, obviously you'll need more or fewer of them. Flat, oblong stones can be really lovely. little tiny stones, heftier stones. It can be nice to kind of get the stones on the left and right to be similar sizes, although you don't have to get too particular about that. And depending on the size of the stones, you might be kind of more, in the inner shoe or outer shoe when you start to use your tuning forks on these. These are kind of medium-sized stones, so there's quite a few of them. You can use pretty big, hefty stones to move up and down the spine, and then you won't need so many of them. It's lovely bilateral. It is even lovely to put them right on the spine, and it is even nice to alternate hot and cold stones as well. Notice I covered them back up again. Just a reminder, whenever you use tuning forks, it's nice to activate them and then place them near the client's ears so the client can hear them for the full duration. If you pay attention to the feeling of the forks in your hands, and you might be surprised how long you need to hold the forks for the vibration to totally stop. Now I'm going to be using the tuning forks directly on the stone, and so what I did is I put a thinner layer of towel so the client can feel the vibration of the forks. It can be nice to use the stones, the forks bilaterally, and have a fork on the left and the right at the same level. You can start all the way up at around T1. It looks like I'm starting a little bit lower than that. And there's different ways you can do this. You can hold each set of forks for the duration of an entire vibration, and you can also move along inferior spinal segments quicker than one full duration, kind of depending on how long you have for this part of the treatment. And also, if you want it to be a really kind of deep, relaxing, and or tonifying treatment, remember that these UB shoe points are extremely tonifying points, and they can actually tonify or strengthen all of the organ systems in the whole body. So each spinal level of a UB shoe correlates to a different organ. So starting all the way up around the one just inferior to T3, thoracic 3, corresponds to the lungs, and then T4 corresponds to pericardium, T5 corresponds to heart, and so on. And so, but rather what a lot of massage, now acupuncturists, we study, we study the points generally a lot longer than massage therapists, and so, we tend to have more of the points memorized. But for massage therapists, you don't have to memorize what each level of shoe is correlating to. You can just treat all of them. They balance and harmonize, and if one system is deficient or excessive or holding dampness or in whatever way it's out of balance, it will, by very nature, affect the other systems. And so it is effective to treat all of the UB shoe points, and you don't have to study what each one does. Now, if you place the forks and they kind of suck up the vibration faster and the vibration does not resonate as long, that's a good cue that that spinal segment, that level, needs treatment more. So let's say we're here around the level of L1 right now, and the vibration goes away quickly when you set the forks down. You can reactivate the forks on your rubber activator or the heel of your foot or the heel of your shoe, and then place them at the same level. And then generally it will not quite suck out the vibration quite as quickly, and you'll basically keep reapplying it at the same level until that when you place the forks down, it resonates just as long as everywhere else. Now, one note of caution here, especially for beginners, Sometimes you'll accidentally hold the forks too high up on the stem, or bump the forks onto your clothes or the table or something else. So if you accidentally deaden the vibration of the forks yourself, that doesn't count as the vibration running out too quickly. So if you're accidentally holding the forks up too high, or you accidentally don't strike the forks as hard, so you never had a good enough vibration to begin with, or you accidentally kind of knocked it on the table or your clothes or something, you might just not have as good a vibration to begin with. But you will very clearly feel, if you pay attention to the length of vibration, that some areas resonate and will keep on vibrating, and other areas will suck the vibration out. Now, sometimes when you use the high forks, the forks that don't have this weight on top, sometimes they will keep vibrating a long time, even if it needs good treatment. But these bigger forks tend to do the opposite, where they tend to suck out the vibration and end the vibration if they need more treatment. Now here you can see I'm using 2 forks on the sacrum stone at once, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You could also use 1 fork. Couple pointers about setting the forks on the stones. It can be nice to kind of set the forks on a little bit of a 45-degree angle and then land the fork flat. So let me draw, like if I was, if this red line here, let's say I guess was the top of a stone, when I first land the fork, and it doesn't have to be a dramatic 45-degree angle, but rather than landing it at a 90-degree angle, what that can kind of do is kind of make like a bloop, and it kind of can not be, it can kind of dissipate in a not so smooth of a way the vibration. So what can often be nice is to kind of land on a little bit of an angle and then bring the fork up to perpendicular. Now, that I've noticed is particularly true if you're putting the forks directly on the hot stones, and particularly for the more sensitive areas that are the points that are on areas where there is less flesh and more directly over bone. So using myself here as an example, if we were to place forks on any of these kind of bony points here near the metacarpal phalangeal joint is small intestine 3, or any of the points all the way around the wrist, any of these points that are basically bony and not fleshy, that can be particularly true to kind of land on an angle, particularly if you were to have a stone there. We'll see in another demo where it's quite lovely to put the forks on stones on facial points like gallbladder 14, that great point that is 1 sun right above the middle of the eyebrow. Now, because I have a blanket here, it kind of softens the blow, if you will, and kind of makes the landing a little bit more smooth anyway. Speaking of which, working here on linens and or more muscular and or fleshier points, you're going to want to use a little bit more pressure with the forks. So if you're on the tummy, or if you're on a muscle or a nice big sacrum bone, you can use a little bit of a pressure. Now, it doesn't have to be a ton of pressure. It could just be like a half a pound to a pound or 2 of pressure. I'm kind of talking a lot here to try to tell you a lot quickly with the demo, but when you're really doing a treatment, and here I'm showing you that you could use 1 series of vibrations to move your way down the Yubi Shu and or Huatou Jiaji points. But when you're in a real treatment, what I was going to say is that what you want to get into is a rhythm of really feeling the vibration of the forks and feeling how the client is responding to the forks. You can, if you're just learning how to sense this, one kind of easy beginner cue is to work with the client's breath. And so then rather than just kind of quickly and randomly putting the forks down as quickly as you can after the vibration runs out, is to actually kind of work with the client's breath and hold the forks as long as they're breathing out, and then use their next breath to put the forks on. Just like music, where in music the silence and the rhythm of the music is as important as the notes in the music, it's very similar to that with the forks, where you want to get into a rhythm of, not just applying the forks as quickly as possible, but allowing the forks to be still and allowing there to be moments between using the forks. Here, of course, I went back to the beginning of the video and letting the client hear the forks, but it was largely because I was still going to talk about a few points here. But it is actually a good reminder that you don't just let the clients hear the tuning forks at the beginning of a session, but it is also nice to kind of bring them back into that soundscape throughout the session. That's actually another lovely thing about playing the Ohm therapeutic CDs, is that you have these overtones and notes all resonating with the C sharp and the forks, and the person already can very much physically feel the vibration of the forks in the session, and then when you add that element of the sound in the room, and then you put the forks near the client's ears, it can sort of become delightfully confusing, where the client can feel the vibration throughout their whole body, and then they can hear the sound and the vibration in the music, and then you put the forks by their ears and they can feel it there, and it can be really nice to kind of return to that. It can be very grounding. What I want to show you here too, let me see if I have a view higher up on the shoulders, perhaps where I have the forks next to her. Okay, great. So that reminds me of a lovely point to integrate. And of course, I'm not showing you all the points on this simple Yubi Shu Huato Jiaji treatment, but here at the top of the shoulders, that most common trigger point in the whole body, the middle trigger point of trapezius, corresponds with gallbladder 21. So the most common trigger point in the body is the middle of the upper traps, and it corresponds with gallbladder 21, and it's on the fleshy top of the middle of the traps. And why I want to point out this point is that when I'm talking about putting the forks next to the client's ears and kind of letting them be surrounded by this sound symphony, and as you integrate the use of hearing and feeling the sound throughout the treatment, there are some points that lend themselves particularly well to that. And one of them is GB21, because you can place the stem of the fork on GB21 and then have the forks near the client's ears so that they are feeling the vibration at the same time they're hearing the vibration. And any points that are powerful points near the top of the shoulders and ears are particularly lovely for that. I'm not going to teach you too many points right now, but another really beautiful one is this big round bone behind the ears called the mastoid process. Immediately posteriorly and inferiorly to it is a nice divot, and gallbladder 21 and gallbladder 12 and gallbladder 20 are both in that region. That is another point. You can angle the stem this way and then have the forks this way, and the client is feeling this vibrate their whole head at the same time that they can feel the forks. It's quite powerful. So we're going to see you can go to review other videos to see other tuning forks with or without the use of stones. So I'm not going to cover all the points in the body here by any means. But I would like to just kind of give a reminder. I was talking about how much pressure to use, and to use a little bit more pressure on fleshy points. One of the beautiful things about using the stones is that they kind of make the vibration resonate and travel deeper into the body. So it's kind of like dropping a pebble in a still pond and the ripples move out. So I've noticed that the vibration of the forks combined with the stones allows that vibration to travel in a very profound way deep into the body. And it can be very grounding, because sometimes if you don't use enough grounding points with the tuning forks in particular, or if the therapist and or client is not particularly grounded, sometimes the tuning forks can be a little bit ungrounding. So if you combine them with the stones, they can be extra grounding. Now, of course, the heat of the stones can be too much for some clients and can be straight up contraindicated for certain clients. And so you can actually use the profound connection of the stones with the forks even if you don't add heat to the stones. So you can take these same stones, not heated up, and just use it for the weight and the grounding factor of the stone, and then place the fork on top, which can be a very profound way to take that vibration into the body. If you do use the heated stone, just a little bit of a word of caution or awareness is that it is, I've noticed a physical reality of these forks kind of intensifying the effect of the heat, and it can actually sort of make the stones feel hotter. So just be aware of that as you apply the stones. Now, I'm showing a very simple kind of bilateral use of Kwato Jaji, which you can use for inner shu and outer shu as well. But you can basically integrate the use of hot stones on many different points in the body. It would be particularly useful at points where you need to tonify and or add heat. So it would not be such a good idea to use the forks with hot stones in areas that are needing to clear heat. So for example, you may recall that the best point on the body for clearing heat is large intestine 11 in the lateral crook of the elbow. So that heat clearing point would not be a good place to use hot stones. However, would be an excellent place to use cold stone. So you could put a cold stone there and then add the vibration to use clearing. If you are going to use other points like that, word of reminder, sort of the same or similar logic you would use in point choice for other treatments. You don't just want to treat a point locally, but it is very useful to open up the whole channel or the whole meridian, and to also work with points distally as well as points contralaterally or and not just on the same side but also contralaterally. And so in the example of large intestine 11 in the crook of the elbow, you wouldn't just put a cold stone there thinking, well, that's the best point in the body to clear heat, I'm just going to go right to the best point. What would be even more effective typically is to also open up points proximally and distally on the channel. And so in that case you could just pick, you could either travel the entire length of the meridian with just finger pressure and or tuning forks, or you could just pick some powerful points at the ends of the channel. So for example, you could work with large intestine 4 and all the way down the meridian. I'm going to press pause here because once again we can use me here as a demo. So you can basically all the way up from the lateral crook of the elbow all the way up to the anatomical snuff box. If I was to pull back my thumb, we would see a little divot there between the tendons. You draw a straight line there between large intestine 11. Let's see if I have any luck with the screen drawer here of a relatively straight line. So a straight line between large intestine 11 and large intestine 4 is the whole meridian. And so you could open up all the way along that meridian, and then in the yin-yang skin junction on the flesh immediately next to the bone, so where the skin changes color and right tucked up under the bone is where the rest of the meridian travels. And oops, I'm sorry, I labeled this one large intestine 4, and that is, you probably already caught me there, is obviously incorrect. Large intestine 4, this snuff box here, is large intestine 5. Large intestine 4, of course, is Hagu, which many people would say is the best point in the body for treating pain, all kinds of pain, low back pain, menstrual cramps, headaches, toothache, all kind of pain. So here in the fleshy part of the thumb webbing, but tucked right under the bone, is large intestine 4, and large intestine 5 is the snuff box. And so in that example of using a cold stone up here on large intestine 11 because it clears heat, you could also use a cold stone, and you could use a smaller cold stone down here because we have a smaller area. You could place a cold stone here on large intestine 4, and then place a fork here on large intestine 4, and you could place a fork here on top of the stone, cold stone on large intestine 11, and you can open up that channel using cold stones for clearing heat, just as well as you could use the hot stones in the rest, as the example in the rest of the demo. Well, and then of course you could treat this all the way down to the end of the meridian as well. While I'm showing you some additional points here, I'll just point out a very powerful tonifying point here on the channel is large intestine 10. This is Tu Sun, inferior to the crease of the elbow, and this large intestine 10 is a super powerful tonifying point in the body, and it works well with stomach 36. Any kind of conditions with deficiencies, which would be most chronic conditions, many immune compromised conditions, many autoimmune conditions, fibromyalgia, Crohn's disease, all kinds of stuff. Now, I could kind of keep going here and showing you all kinds of extra points on the body, but what I mostly wanted to show you on this demo is how to integrate the use of forks on the stones. And as long as you're clear about the difference between using when to use cold stones versus hot stones, and to make sure that you do some grounding with the treatment, then you can be pretty creative in your treatments. Have fun integrating the use of tuning forks and stones. It is a very powerful combination.